Deborah Hensley had spent most of her life alone. At 60, she had built a quiet routine, morning walks through the park, afternoons spent tending to her small garden, and evenings curled up with a book. Her life was peaceful, but there was always an ache, a loneliness that she had never quite been able to fill. That's why, when she met Khalil Mercer online, it felt like fate. He was 25. Young, energetic, and full of charm. At first, she had been hesitant. What could a man his age possibly see in someone like her? But Khalil was persistent. He showered her with attention, complimented her intelligence, and made her feel beautiful in a way she hadn't felt in years. "You're incredible," he would tell her. "Age is just a number." His words ignited something inside her. A warmth, a hope she hadn't dared to feel in decades. Her friends warned her to be careful, but she dismissed their concerns. Khalil was different. He understood her. And most importantly, he wanted her. Their conversations stretched for hours, turning into long, intimate phone calls late into the night. Khalil had a way with words, making her laugh, making her blush. He spoke about his dreams, his childhood, and how he had always been drawn to older women. "I just don't connect with girls my age," he confessed one evening. "They don't have your wisdom, your grace. I need someone like you, Deborah." Her heart fluttered. It had been so long since she had felt wanted, desired. She found herself thinking about him constantly, checking her phone for his messages first thing in the morning and before she went to bed. Then, one day, Khalil made a bold suggestion. "I want to meet you in person," he said. "I need to see you, to hold you." Deborah hesitated. It was one thing to chat online, but meeting in real life? That was different. But Khalil reassured her, his voice full of warmth. "I'll take care of everything. Just come to me." And just like that, her hesitation melted away. Deborah spent days preparing for the trip, feeling giddy like a teenager before a first date. She picked out her best outfits, spent extra time on her hair, and even bought a new bottle of perfume, the same one she had worn in her youth. Khalil had given her the details. A bus ticket to his city, where he would meet her at the station and take her to his apartment. "It'll be just the two of us," he had whispered. No distractions. No interruptions. His excitement was infectious. But Deborah couldn't shake the small, nagging feeling in the back of her mind. A tiny voice whispering, "Is this too good to be true?" She pushed the thought away. She deserved happiness. And Khalil was offering it to her. The morning of her departure, Deborah's best friend Linda called. "You sure about this?" Linda asked. "You've never even met this guy." Deborah smiled, trying to sound confident. "I know, but I feel like I already know him." "He's wonderful, Linda. I really think this could be something special." Linda sighed. "Just be careful, okay? Text me when you get there." "I will," Deborah promised. She boarded the bus with her heart racing. The ride was long, but she barely noticed. She kept reading over Khalil's messages, feeling the excitement build with every mile closer she got to him. When the bus finally pulled into the station, Deborah stepped off, scanning the crowd. And then she saw him, tall, handsome, smiling just as she had imagined. "Khalil," she breathed, her heart pounding. He opened his arms. "Deborah." And as she stepped into his embrace, she felt safe. She had no idea how wrong she was. Khalil's apartment was surprisingly elegant, with sleek furniture and dim, moody lighting. He had gone all out for their first evening together. Candles flickered on the table, soft jazz played in the background, and the aroma of home-cooked food filled the air. "I wanted this to be perfect," Khalil said, pulling out a chair for her. Deborah was touched. No one had ever put in this much effort for her before. As they ate, Khalil kept the conversation light, making her laugh with stories from his childhood. But something felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way he stared at her a little too long when she spoke. Or how his fingers tensed slightly when she mentioned her friend Linda checking in on her. And then there was the smell. Underneath the delicious aroma of food there was something else. Faint, but distinct. Metallic. Almost like... Deborah pushed the thought away. She was being paranoid. Khalil was wonderful. Everything was fine. But it wasn't. And soon she would realize it. Deborah Hensley's excitement was at its peak as she stepped off the bus, her heart pounding with the kind of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. The city air smelled different, brisk, alive, full of possibilities. She pulled her coat tightly around herself and scanned the street for him. And then she saw him. Khalil Mercer stood just a few feet away, leaning casually against a lamppost, his hands in his pockets. He was just as he had appeared in his photos, tall, confident, and devastatingly handsome. His easy smile spread across his face as their eyes met, and Deborah felt her knees weaken slightly. "You made it," he said, his voice warm, familiar. He stepped forward and pulled her into a gentle but firm hug. The scent of his cologne lingered on his jacket, a scent that was subtle yet intoxicating. The unease she had been feeling just hours earlier, the small voice in the back of her mind warning her that online romances could be deceptive, vanished in an instant. He was real. He was here. And most importantly, he wanted her. Khalil carried her suitcase effortlessly, guiding her through the busy streets toward his apartment. Deborah found herself smiling, laughing even, as they walked side by side. He made small talk, asking about her trip, her favorite part of the journey. He was attentive, engaging, every bit the man she had fallen for through messages and late-night phone calls. As they reached his apartment, Deborah felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment she had dreamed of. The first night in his world. The first time they would truly be alone together. She imagined an evening filled with deep conversations, stolen glances, perhaps even a kiss under the dim glow of his apartment lights. The apartment was exactly as she had expected. Neat, stylish, with a certain masculine charm. Candles flickered on the table, casting soft shadows across the room. A faint aroma of something rich and savory filled the air. "I thought I'd cook for us," Khalil said, gesturing toward the table. Deborah's heart swelled at the gesture. A man who cooked for her. This was more than she could have hoped for. She set her things down and allowed herself to bask in the warmth of the moment. This was it. She had finally found love again. But outside the warm glow of the candles, beyond the charming facade, something else lurked. Something unseen. And soon, the perfect illusion would begin to crack. The first night was perfect, almost too perfect. Khalil was the ideal host. He poured her wine, plated the food with care, and listened intently as she spoke about her life. Every word out of his mouth was smooth, effortless, as if he had rehearsed them 1,000 times. Deborah told herself she was overthinking things. Why question something that felt so right? But as the night wore on, little details began to nag at her. His apartment was spotless. Almost unnaturally so. The kitchen knives were lined up with precision, their edges gleaming under the dim lighting. The refrigerator, though impeccably clean, seemed strangely empty. No leftovers, no snacks, nothing that hinted at someone who lived here day in and day out. And then there was the smell. At first she hadn't noticed it, masked by the scent of the meal he had prepared. But as the night stretched on, she caught faint, lingering traces of something else. Something metallic. Something wrong. She pushed the thought away, attributing it to nerves. This was a new experience after all. It was natural to feel a little on edge. The next morning she awoke to the sound of Khalil moving around the kitchen. The warmth of last night lingered in the air, but something felt different. His demeanor had shifted ever so slightly. He was still smiling, still charming, but there was a distance in his eyes. Throughout the day, she caught him staring at her, longer than necessary, as if he were studying her. Once, she found him standing in the doorway, watching her in silence. When she met his gaze, he simply smiled and walked away. By the second evening, the unease had fully settled in. "Is everything okay?" she asked over dinner, forcing a smile. Khalil looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, his familiar grin returned. "Of course," he said. "Why wouldn't it be?" And yet, something in his voice made her skin crawl. That night, Deborah barely slept. Every sound in the apartment made her jump. She wanted to tell herself she was being silly, that she was letting paranoia get the best of her. But deep down, she knew. Something wasn't right. She picked up her phone and sent a quick message to her friend. "Hey, I don't know if I'm being paranoid, but something feels weird. He's acting different. Maybe I'm overthinking, but I just have this feeling." Her friend's response came almost immediately. "What do you mean? Are you safe?" Deborah hesitated. She didn't want to seem dramatic. "Yeah, I think so. He's just off. I'll let you know if it gets weirder." She set the phone down, took a deep breath, and tried to shake the growing fear curling in her stomach. But she had no idea that it was already too late. Morning came with an eerie stillness. Deborah awoke to find Khalil sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the wooden surface, his expression vacant. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to speak. "I was thinking, maybe I should head home a little earlier than planned," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "It's been amazing, but I don't want to overstay my welcome." Khalil turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The tapping of his fingers stopped. "You're not thinking about leaving, are you?" The way he said it, so calm, so measured, sent a cold shiver down her spine. No, of course not," she said quickly, forcing a laugh. "I just thought—" "Fresh air," he interrupted, standing up. "We should get some fresh air." Deborah nodded, forcing a smile. "That sounds perfect." But Khalil never let her leave that apartment. By the time she realized she was trapped, it was already too late. One moment, she was standing in the dimly lit room, heart pounding with an unshakable sense of dread. The next, everything went black. Khalil had been planning this for months. He moved with precision, his actions practiced, methodical. Deborah never had a chance to scream, never had a chance to fight back. One swift motion, and she was gone. And just like that, another piece of Khalil Mercer's twisted puzzle fell into place. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Deborah had already left behind a clue. A single, seemingly insignificant detail. A trail that would soon lead the police straight to his door. And when they arrived, the horrors they would uncover inside that apartment would be worse than anything they had ever seen before. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness, but inside Khalil Mercer's apartment, the air felt heavy, thick with an unspoken tension. Deborah awoke to find him sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on the window, fingers tapping methodically against the wood. Something about the rhythm made her uneasy, precise, controlled, like the ticking of a clock. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to act normal. "I was thinking," she began, her voice hesitant. "Maybe I should head home a little earlier than planned. It's been amazing. But I don't want to overstay my welcome." Khalil didn't react right away. He kept tapping, his gaze distant, unreadable. Then slowly, he turned to face her. His eyes, which had once been warm and inviting, were now dark pools of something far less familiar. "You're not thinking about leaving, are you?" His voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. Deborah's stomach twisted into knots. She let out a nervous laugh, trying to diffuse whatever tension had suddenly thickened the air between them. No, of course not," she lied. "I just thought—" Fresh air, he interrupted, standing up so suddenly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. We should get some fresh air. The way he said it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Deborah forced a smile. That sounds perfect. But deep down, she knew the truth. Hours passed. Deborah couldn't shake the suffocating feeling of being watched, studied. Khalil never let her out of his sight, not even for a moment. Every time she shifted, he shifted. Every time she inhaled, he seemed to mirror it, as if he was absorbing her presence, taking control over every aspect of the space they shared. By evening, she knew she had to escape. She waited until he went into the other room, then grabbed her phone. With trembling fingers, she typed a message to her friend. Something is wrong. I need help. But before she could hit send, a shadow loomed over her. Who are you texting? Khalil's voice was deceptively calm, but his eyes bore into her like twin daggers. Deborah's heart slammed against her ribs. No one, she said quickly, locking her phone. Just checking my emails. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to her horror, Khalil smiled. Come sit with me, he said, his tone casual. Too casual. Deborah obeyed, sitting on the edge of the couch. Khalil sat beside her, far too close. You know, he said, his voice a gentle whisper, I don't like liars. Her skin prickled with cold sweat. She tried to stand, but before she could move, he grabbed her wrist, gently at first, then with unyielding strength. And then everything went black. When Deborah woke up, she wasn't in the apartment anymore. The air was damp, thick with an acrid scent that made her stomach lurch. The floor beneath her was cold, rough, unforgiving. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized she was in a basement. Not just any basement, a place designed to keep someone hidden. Thick concrete walls surrounded her. The only light came from a single dim bulb overhead, casting long shadows across the room. Against one wall stood a metal table, its surface covered in neat, meticulous rows of tools. Some she recognized, others she wished she hadn't. A chill ran through her body as she took in her surroundings. There was only one way in or out, a heavy bolted door. Deborah's breath came in short, panicked bursts. How had this happened? How had she let herself be deceived so completely? And then she saw it. A chair in the center of the room. Straps attached to the arms. A dark stain beneath it. She wasn't the first. Terror clawed at her throat. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain in her wrists where the rope had dug into her skin. She had to get out. She rushed to the door, her hands shaking as she gripped the handle. She twisted it frantically, pulling, yanking, nothing. It didn't budge. A soft creak from the other side made her freeze. Footsteps. And then, a voice, smooth, patient, terrifying in its calmness. I was hoping you'd be different, Deborah. The door swung open, and Khalil stepped inside. Deborah's scream never had a chance to escape. Time became meaningless. Hours blended into one another, stretching into an endless nightmare. Khalil wasn't in a hurry. He never was. He moved with precision, methodical in the way he observed her, spoke to her, controlled every aspect of her existence. I don't want to hurt you, he had said, his voice smooth as silk. I just want to understand you. But Deborah knew better. Every smile, every soft-spoken word, it was all an illusion, a mask he wore to keep her compliant, to make her feel like there was still hope. But she wasn't naive anymore. She saw the truth in his eyes. And she knew. If she didn't find a way out soon, she never would. She spent days, or was it weeks, watching, learning. Every time he entered the basement, she noted his movements, the way he locked the door, the way he carried himself. He was careful, but not invincible. She just needed one chance. And then, one night, she got it. Khalil had made a mistake. A small one, but a mistake nonetheless. He had left the key within reach, just barely, but it was there. Deborah waited. She controlled her breathing, forced herself to remain still as he turned away. And then, she struck. With everything she had, she lunged, grabbing the key and twisting out of his grasp. Khalil reacted fast, but this time, she was faster. She shoved him backward, sending him crashing against the table. Tools scattered to the floor, metal clanking against concrete. Deborah didn't hesitate. She sprinted for the door, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. Behind her, Khalil recovered. She heard him curse, heard his footsteps racing toward her. The key slipped into place. A click. The door burst open, and Deborah ran. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. She just ran. Through the darkened corridors, up the narrow stairs, through the house that had once seemed so welcoming but now felt like a tomb. She slammed through the front door, into the night air, lungs burning as she sprinted toward the road. Lights. A car. A voice yelling. And then, freedom. The last thing she heard before the world spun into chaos was Khalil's voice, distant but chilling. This isn't over. And she knew. He meant it. As the officers moved deeper into Khalil's apartment, the horror unfolded before them. The first thing that struck them was the overwhelming stench, an acrid mix of bleach and something foul, something unmistakably organic. Their flashlights swept across the dimly lit room, revealing an unsettling level of order. The kitchen was spotless, the knives lined up in perfect symmetry, their edges gleaming under the harsh artificial light. But then they saw it. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar. One officer stepped forward hesitantly, his gloved hand reaching out. As he pulled the door open, the breath left his lungs. Inside, meticulously sealed vacuum bags lined the shelves, each labeled with a date. For a moment, no one spoke. The truth was too ghastly to comprehend. Then, the lead detective exhaled sharply. "Oh my God!" Among the neatly packaged remains, they found the undeniable proof of Deborah's fate. Her name wasn't on the bags, but they didn't need to see it to know. The realization was sickening. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold, methodical butchery. The horror didn't end there. In the far corner of the room, a chest freezer sat, its lid slightly ajar. A senior officer, bracing himself, reached in and pulled out a large, ice-encrusted package. As it thawed slightly in his grip, a lock of familiar silver-blonde hair slipped free from the ice. The room spun, and for a brief moment, silence filled the apartment, before one officer turned away, heaving into a waste bin. This was no ordinary killer. Khalil Mercer wasn't just murdering his victims, he was consuming them. When Khalil was taken into custody, he didn't fight. He simply allowed himself to be handcuffed, a faint smile still playing at the corners of his lips. It was unnerving, his lack of fear, his complete indifference to the reality of his situation. As officers led him into the back of the police car, the street outside his apartment had already become a spectacle. News cameras flashed, journalists shouted questions, and onlookers stood frozen in shock. But Khalil. He barely blinked. At the station, the interrogation room was cold, sterile. A single metal table sat in the center, 2 chairs on either side. Khalil sat with his hands cuffed in front of him, his fingers drumming absently against the table. Across from him, Detective Warren studied him in silence. "You've been careful," the detective finally said, leaning forward slightly. "Most people wouldn't have picked up on what you were doing. But we did." Khalil's lips curled into something resembling amusement. "Took you long enough." It wasn't just the words that sent a chill down Warren's spine, it was the way he said them, so casual, so confident. Like this was all just another game. "You targeted them," Warren continued, his voice steady. "Lonely women, trusting women. You gave them exactly what they were looking for. And then you took everything." Khalil tilted his head slightly, considering. I didn't take anything they weren't willing to give. Warren clenched his jaw. They didn't give you their lives. Khalil exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Didn't they? He let the words linger, watching as Warren's hands curled into fists. They came to me. They walked into my home. They trusted me. And trust? He smiled, tapping a finger against the table. That's a powerful thing. Warren felt his stomach turn. He had interrogated murderers before, but Khalil was different. There was no remorse. No guilt. Just calculation. And that was what made him truly terrifying. The courtroom was packed. Families of the victims sat in tense silence, their faces pale with grief. The press lined the back row, their pens scratching against notepads, cameras ready to capture every moment. The public had followed the case obsessively, horrified by the gruesome details that had emerged. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to hear. The prosecution wasted no time painting Khalil Mercer as a predator. They presented evidence, photos of his apartment, transcripts of his online conversations with Deborah and the other victims, even his social media posts, where he had left chilling breadcrumbs hidden in plain sight. He toyed with them, the prosecutor said, voice heavy with anger. He made them believe he was their savior, their second chance at love. And when they stepped into his world, he stripped them of their dignity, their humanity. Then came the testimonies. Deborah's best friend took the stand, her voice shaking as she described their last conversation. She told me something felt off. She told me she had a bad feeling. And I... Her voice broke. I told her she was overthinking it. The pain in her voice was unbearable. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to play a different angle. They painted Khalil as a troubled young man, someone who had suffered deep childhood trauma. They argued that his actions stemmed from years of emotional isolation, that he had never learned to process relationships in a healthy way. But the jury wasn't buying it. Neither was the judge. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, a collective exhale filled the room. But there was no relief. No true victory. Because Deborah and the others were still gone. Khalil showed no reaction. He simply sat there, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. And then, as the judge issued the sentence, life without the possibility of parole, Khalil Mercer finally did something unexpected. He laughed. The trial had ended, but the scars Khalil Mercer left behind would never fade. The families of the victims struggled to piece their lives back together, knowing that no amount of justice could undo the horror of what had happened. Deborah's best friend, the woman who had fought tirelessly to find her, found herself trapped in an endless cycle of guilt. She replayed every conversation, every warning sign she had dismissed. If only she had listened sooner. If only she had told Deborah not to go. But there were no do-overs. No second chances. In the months following Khalil's sentencing, his name continued to haunt the public consciousness. True crime podcasts dissected his actions. Documentaries explored his psyche. People online debated endlessly, was he a product of his past, or simply a monster born without a soul? But for those who had known Deborah, there was only one truth that mattered. She had been kind. She had been hopeful. She had believed in love, even when the world had given her reasons not to. And in the end, that belief had led her into the arms of a killer. The apartment where Khalil had lured his victims was eventually condemned, its walls unable to shake the horror they had witnessed. But even after it was torn down, the legend remained. People whispered about it, about the charming young man who had hidden a darkness no one saw coming. And somewhere, in a maximum security prison, Khalil Mercer sat in his cell, still wearing that same unreadable smile. Because in the end, he had never needed freedom. He had already won. His story would never be forgotten. And that was exactly what he wanted. Even behind bars, Khalil Mercer remained an enigma. Psychologists, criminologists, and law enforcement officials all sought to understand what had made him the way he was. Was it a defect in his brain? A childhood trauma that shaped his lack of empathy? Or was he simply born this way? A man with no remorse, no ability to see human life as anything more than a means to his own twisted satisfaction. He was placed in solitary confinement due to the high-profile nature of his crimes. Even in prison, there were rules, and child killers, rapists, and cannibals ranked at the bottom of the social hierarchy. If given the chance, the other inmates would tear him apart. And yet Khalil didn't seem to mind isolation. He spent his days in silence, occasionally humming to himself or scrawling unreadable notes in the margins of books the prison library provided. Some guards swore they heard him whispering to himself at night. But when they checked his cell, he would simply be lying on his cot, smiling. Psychiatrists attempted to analyze him, but he was careful with his words. He knew how to play the game, how to give just enough insight into his mind to keep them interested, but never enough to truly understand him. It was a form of control, a way to remind them that even in confinement, he held power over them. The media had given him a name: the Gourmet Killer. The implication was chilling. He hadn't just killed his victims. He had consumed them. It was a perversion so grotesque that it horrified even seasoned professionals. But Khalil? He simply found it amusing. For the families of Khalil's victims, his imprisonment brought no closure. Deborah's mother, once a lively and warm-hearted woman, became a shadow of herself. She rarely left the house, her days spent staring at old photo albums, running her fingers over pictures of her daughter's smiling face. She had lost more than just her child. She had lost her future, the grandchildren she would never have, the phone calls she would never receive. The other families were no different. Some turned to alcohol, some to activism, speaking out about online predators and the dangers of trusting strangers too soon. They pushed for new laws, hoping to prevent another Khalil Mercer from slipping through the cracks. But the damage was already done. One of the most haunting aspects of the case was the way Khalil had inserted himself into their lives. He had met their daughters, charmed their sisters, made himself a presence in their worlds before tearing them apart. For Deborah's best friend, the guilt was unbearable. She had been the last person to speak to her before she disappeared. She had dismissed her fears, reassured her that she was overthinking. And now, Deborah was gone. She tried therapy, but no amount of professional help could undo the knowledge that she had, in some small way, contributed to her friend's fate. She began visiting Khalil in prison, demanding answers. But he never gave her any. He would simply smile, tilt his head and say, "You already know." The worst part? A part of her believed him. The nightmare should have ended with Khalil's sentencing. But it didn't. In the months following his trial, reports of copycat killers began surfacing. Young men, obsessed with the details of his case, attempted to recreate his crimes. Some used dating apps to lure their victims, mimicking his manipulative charm. Others went further, adopting his method of preserving his victims in grotesque ways. Social media platforms became battlegrounds, flooded with debates about glorification and responsibility. True crime fanatics dissected Khalil's every move, some condemning him, others disturbingly admiring him. One of the most chilling incidents involved a teenager who had covered his bedroom walls with newspaper clippings of Khalil Mercer. He was arrested before he could claim a victim, but when police searched his home, they found something horrifying. A journal filled with letters addressed to Khalil himself. The boy had idolized him. Worse still, he wasn't alone. Online forums dedicated to understanding Khalil's mind had sprung up. Some members were psychologists and criminologists, trying to analyze his actions from an academic perspective. But others, they saw him as something else entirely. A mentor. A guide. A god. The justice system had locked him away. But his influence, that was proving impossible to contain. No one had expected Khalil Mercer to speak publicly again. He had refused interviews, ignored letters from journalists and filmmakers. Until one day, without warning, he agreed. A well-respected journalist was granted an exclusive interview, conducted under heavy surveillance. Cameras were set up, microphones tested, and when the moment came, Khalil was led into the room, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He looked the same. Calm. Amused. The journalist wasted no time. "Why did you do it?" Khalil leaned back in his chair, considering the question. Then he smiled. "Why does anyone do anything?" "Your victims." "My meals," he corrected, his voice eerily smooth. The journalist's throat went dry. But she pressed on. "Did you ever love any of them?" Khalil chuckled. "Define love." She stared at him, waiting. And then, for the first time, his smile faded. His gaze darkened. "I loved what they could be. What they gave me. But love?" He tilted his head. "Love is such a fragile thing. I prefer permanence." The interview ended shortly after. But its impact rippled through the world. Because Khalil Mercer had just confirmed what everyone had feared. He didn't see his victims as people. He saw them as ingredients. Years passed. Khalil remained in prison, his presence still haunting the public consciousness. Books were written about him. Psychologists debated his case in academic circles. And then, one night, it happened. A guard making his rounds found Khalil Mercer dead in his cell. No sign of struggle. No external injuries. Just his lifeless body, slumped over the small table where he had been writing. In his hands, he clutched a single piece of paper. One sentence was scrawled across it. "A meal must always be finished. The autopsy found no poison, no foul play." His heart had simply stopped. Some believed he had orchestrated his own end, that he had chosen the moment. Others speculated that his body had simply given out after years of psychological strain. But there were darker theories. Some believed that one of his own followers had gotten to him. That a fellow inmate, someone obsessed with his legacy, had finished the story for him. The truth would never be known. But one thing was certain, Khalil Mercer was finally gone. And yet, his shadow remained. Because in the darkest corners of the internet, in whispered conversations and secret forums, his name still lived on, and his influence, that would never die.